Hello and welcome to this discussion on your IP or future with Creative First. Our first speaker, Miriam Joseph, is an author and a leading producer. She began her career with BBC, where she was a broadcast journalist and producer for their documentaries and dramas. She then moved to India to work on feature films at Excel Entertainment. As CEO of the company, she demonstrated an ability to build, nurture, and lead large multidisciplinary teams to deliver some of the highest grossing films such as Dawn, Dawn 2, Rock On, Luck by Chance, Game, Talash, etc. She is now a consulting producer and also serves as a jury and selection committee member for festivals like the International Film Festival of Kerala, the Regina International Film Festival Canada, and the International Film Festival of Rotterdam. Previously, Miriam was also consultant to the National Film Development Corporation's Film Bazaar and mentor to their screenwriters and producer labs. She is a published author and an active member of the Women in Cinema Collective. Miriam, welcome to this discussion.
Thanks, Nita.
Our second speaker, Jamshed Mistry, is an experienced counsel and founder of the International Legal Alliance, a virtual global network of lawyers. He has a demonstrated history of working in the law practice industry and skilled in various types of litigation, international law, media, and entertainment law. He is a member of the Bombay Bar Association, the Intellectual Property Rights Practitioners Association, Maximum Lawyer Group, and associate member of the Canadian Bar Association. He is also an advisory board member of the South Asian Fashion Week in Vancouver and the Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival. Jamshed, welcome to this discussion with Creative First.
Thank you.
Miriam, given your experience in both documentary filmmaking and feature films, are there specific considerations that documentary filmmakers should keep in mind compared to those working on fictional narratives?
Yes, I think that documentary filmmakers do need to pay a little bit more attention to copyright, ownership, mostly because they deal in the real world. It's not fiction. They're dealing with real people, real places, real events, and in many cases using archival footage, news footage, diary excerpts, letters, whatever sources they use within their work, because they deal in the real world, they have to be aware of it, be careful, and see it needs to actually feature in their planning, in their pre-production itself, because they need to know what they can and can't do when they're trying to tell a factual story. So yes, I think there's I don't know if it's more or less, but it's certainly very different. And documentary filmmakers, factual broadcasters need to keep specific things in mind that fiction makers don't need to. Or it's different. But the real world can be less forgiving than the fictional world. So it's sensible to, keep an eye on it, keep your attention on it at all times.
Jamshed, what legal frameworks do you typically recommend for independent creators to safeguard their intellectual property rights, especially in scenarios where they may not have extensive resources for legal support?
So I think, the most important aspect here is that based on first principles, that people should first understand that intellectual property and especially copyright are not a single right. It is an entire bundle of rights. It starts from the idea, and then finally it goes right up to the film or the documentary or in whatever final form it comes. And in that entire process, as it creatively gets evolved, you have so many rights getting created. And those rights may be in the form of copyright, they may be in the form of performers' rights, and so many other tertiary rights, as we call them. So I think they need to be aware that it's not because the common parlance is usually who owns the copyright and, full stop. It's not like that. So that's the first thing that, they need to understand. Where do you get all this from? Now, for example, you have to also then understand the country's, contractual law. I mean, for example, in India, we follow the Indian Contract Act. So you have to understand that whichever contract you enter into has to follow the principles and the guiding light of that particular act. And then in that act, of course, in that contract, you have then various clauses which then represent, the rights of, the person who's contracting with, or you as the creative person, what rights you have and those obligations. So it's sometimes it's two-way, it's three-way, sometimes it's manifold. So all these things are then put together. And as far as, the copyright part is concerned, yes, there are specific clauses which protect your copyright as an individual, as a creator, as well as the final sort of producers, his or her rights are also, protected. A lot of assignment of rights also happen during that process. So this multitude of, legal sort of, uh, format that actually takes place quite interestingly during the production of the film. So it's an ongoing process, and that's how, people should understand. And as I always say, as it's as a entertainment lawyer, it's my job to know what the Jimmy Jib is. It is their obligation also to basically understand these little nuances of the law.
When it comes to documentary filmmakers, Jamshed, and also first timers who are looking for co-productions, based on what you said, does the contract work? What are the key things that they need to know? Because it could be multiple countries, while it may be something that may be distributed in America but shot in India, etc., etc.
So of course, we were very fortunate that we had dealt with at that point of time the independent filmmakers, where they had all come together, and we had that experience quite early in our legal practice. So we saw how everything came together. It followed the same path as film independent follows in the US. And of course, they were a non sort of government organization, but essentially, independent filmmakers are, I mean, sorry, I think they're a little more creative than your regular set of people. No disrespect there. So you have a lot of emotion there. They would like to understand things. They would like to sit down with you as the lawyer. You need to explain, to them right from the basics that, okay, these are the regular contracts that you have to enter into. Whether also you need to know, I mean, for example, if there is a manager on the set, then how is his contract or her contract going to be sort of incorporated? Of course, with the copyright, the payment schedule, the timelines. Then you have the various clauses for the jurisdiction. That is, if it is sort of India, if it is shot outside, then with your either the co-producer, what contract you enter with them. You also need to know the difference between an official co-production and that is, where two countries come together and you're, filing for an official co-production and getting benefit under the treaty, or is it a co-production or a joint venture that you are entering into? So these are the sort of the basic sort of documents and understanding that you should have just before you actually start, making a documentary.
Miriam, from your experience, what advice would you like to offer independent creators to ensure that their rights are adequately safeguarded, and also, which gives them an opportunity to work with more established studios?
So two things. We've just heard Jamshed talk to us very briefly about the concept of copyright and the idea of copyright being more than just one copyright, one ownership, that it is a whole bundle of things, and that it kind of has a life through the entire production of a film or a documentary. So my first piece of advice always to everybody is find yourself a lawyer, because there is a reason why entertainment lawyers are a specialized group of people, because this is a specialized area that requires a fair amount of study and knowledge. And I don't expect any producer, I don't do it, and I've been at this for 35 years, I don't know everything there is to know about copyright. I have a basic idea. And if I need to find something, I kind of do my research. I'm a bit old school like that. But I would never take one foot forward and sign anything legal like a contract without having a lawyer look at it. In the case of first-time filmmakers, not all of them can afford a lawyer. In that case, you have to be your own advocate. You have to get on the internet. The University of Google is available to this generation. They need to study. They need to look and understand what they're doing. So for me, I think my first piece of advice always is have a good legal backup. Because without that, sometimes it's a scary world, this world of contracting, especially with bigger players, So if you're a first timer, A, find a lawyer. B, I like, when I, in the producing course that I teach at, one of the things I try and get people to understand is this concept of what is a bundle of rights. What does it mean to own copyright? Whose copyright? There are several copyrights in one film. There is, the negative right, which is, kind of encompasses all the rights. But everybody who takes part in a piece of work, essentially, when they sign a contract with the producer, they are, for a fee, selling their creativity to that producer, and that producer is more or less going to own it forever in the context of that piece of work. So if we're making a feature film and a commercial feature film, when the cinematographer signs a contract, when the costume designer signs a contract, their creative work is the property of the producer at the end of this project. You know what I mean? And the producer then has the right to do many things with that creative work that he or she has purchased, for want of a better word. That's what you're doing. You're buying these rights from these creators. Now, when it comes to creators like writers and lyricists and composers, it's slightly different. For the longest time in Hindi cinema, if you were a lyricist or a composer, you took a big fat fee and you made the music, you wrote the music, you composed it, you finished it, you handed it to the producer, and then the producer owned everything. That's beginning to change with the development in the law, with the idea of royalties. All of those things have begun to bring small changes into that. Slightly less, or slightly later than the music industry, the writers have begun to think about what it means to be the progenitors and creators of ideas and what their idea of ownership should be. They've had a pretty rough deal, really, for a long time in terms of ownership of ideas. And the Screenwriters Association is working pretty hard to try and sort of redress that balance. So for first timers out there, if you're a writer or if you're a director, I suggest that you find a lawyer, because really, this isn't something you need to get into. I genuinely don't think you should, because it takes away from the time you have to write good stories. If you're a producer, however, I always advise that you study this a bit more in depth and a bit more in detail. And frankly, if you are driven enough and you really want to do this, most of the information is out there to be had. And then you just need to make sure that you can, if you're a producer, you have to be able to find your way to a lawyer who's not going to charge you too much and who will help you understand what you're getting into, over and above what you already know. So that's my thing, is understand that copyright is a big part of what we do. It's a reasonably complicated part of what we do. And I know many filmmakers who've woken up 6 months, a year into the process to find that they didn't know that they had sold everything. They didn't know that they no longer owned something. And so it's important that I like why you do this, because I hope people watch this and I hope people understand that it's something they need to pay attention to. I think for the longest time, nobody did. Also, this idea of how you monetize something. I think that more people in Hindi cinema, certainly, or actually in Indian cinema, have begun to understand or think about copyright when they began to understand that, you can sell music rights for mobile ringtones. You can sell music rights for a whole bundle of things. You can sell your film not just on satellite, but you can sell it for in-flight entertainment. You can sell it. Do you know what I mean? Suddenly people began to realize that, oh, it's not so simple. There are producers who make money and continue to monetize a single project over decades if it's a good project. So that's what I would advise. Understand the concept of copyright. Don't try and become an expert at it. There is no need. There are people who've already studied for years. You need to find their help, but understand that it's important and understand your position in the world of copyright. So someone like a costume designer has less to lose on a film than, say, a writer does, and so that's how I advise people.
Jamshed, could you provide insights into the specific legal considerations that differentiate documentary filmmaking from fictional narratives, and especially in terms of fair use and obtaining necessary permissions for content usage?
Yes. So, of course, the biggest sort of problem that a lot of first-time filmmakers had is that they had, somebody had told them that, oh, here is a great story, and this person is, either he's alive or his family is here, and then they go and they used to approach them. I'm sharing this more as a narrative and then come to the point. That so they used to do that. They would approach them. They would say that we would like to build a sort of a story around the life of Mr. X or Miss Y or so and so, and a lot of enthusiasm. They would go ahead. They would sign affidavits sometimes, and then just proceed with the filmmaking process. And then there would be a stage where they would probably go to the studio and try to sort of ensure that the studio either purchases, buys into the project, or even look for an international film co-producer or something like that. And then finally it came down to the film being released in theater. And what would happen? A family member, not necessarily someone who they had actually entered into the agreement with, but somebody else would come to court and say, sorry, they've not taken our permission. And that became a real and huge issue. And initially, the court also sort of realized that here's the producer who spent such a lot of money to reach this stage, I mean, he's a first-time producer. He's, not really fully conversant with the process. And, right at the end, somebody's coming and asking for a stay. Fortunately, as time has gone on and the law has evolved, now the courts are very, very, very clear. You cannot come to court last minute. So please don't come and ask for a stay, because it's obvious that the producer has put in a lot of effort, and as Miriam very rightly said, this whole entire bundle of rights is now created a product which is far greater than the original idea that was with the screenwriter, or even a family member of the person who on whose life this film was made. And so now I think so that is now very, very clear, and I'm glad that the courts, at least in India, are very clear about that. So we find much less people running to court last minute. So I think that's a great thing, and that should put a lot of filmmakers at ease today. That was not the case, let me tell you, 10, 15 years ago. So that's good. So additionally, that's what they need to be a little careful about, especially if you're doing a life story. As far as other sort of contracts, and that is probably the same, where you would find, in fact, in a documentary situation, if you've sort of evolved your own idea, perhaps a little less paperwork, but otherwise, I think by and large, the paperwork, for a documentary or a film at the lowest end is almost the same. It increases mainly because of the number of players that you have. That's really what happens. And but I think if you have someone who can guide you through the process, that's not a problem at all.
Miriam, given your involvement in setting up India's first producing course at SRFTI, could you elaborate on the curriculum and what specific challenges producers should be prepared to address in today's converging media landscape?
Oh, well, just a little history. When I moved back to India at the turn of the century, I moved back for two reasons. I had been to film school, always wanted to work in feature films, but kind of got sidetracked. I got a job at the BBC. It was fun. I got trained, and I worked primarily in factual current affairs history, and did a bit of drama only towards the end. But what I did was I was trained to be a professional producer. That's what I was. I was a producer. They'd call somebody a producer, call somebody a producer. I'd do my research, and I'd find that that person hadn't been anywhere near the actual film. Their money had paid to get the film made. And so they were the financiers, also producers by virtue of having paid. But the idea of a professional producer didn't exist. There was, acha, production wale ko bulao, production wale ko bol do catering order kare, ya Jimmy Jib order kare. So there was no coherent plan in terms of putting a film together. Virtually nobody made budgets when I moved back to India for feature films. There was an idea of how much it would cost, and whoever this financing producer was just kept putting cash in. And it was, in those days, very much cash. People would walk into rooms with briefcases of money, and this is not me telling a joke. This is real. And so that was a bit scary for me, because once I began to work, when I first moved back to India for a year, I worked in advertising and was pleasantly surprised, because they had a general idea of what a professional producer was. But the film industry was very different. suddenly I found myself, if I'd agreed to do a job as even the line producer, I could not expect to have a team of people that knew what they were meant to do. So if I said, I want a unit production manager and I want a production coordinator, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what the production assistant will do, they'd be like, ma'am, लिख के बता दे तो हम कर लेंगे. No, don't you know that this is what you're meant to do? Like, aren't these roles defined already? And to my dismay, I found that it wasn't. And then I figured, oh, they're not teaching producing at the two film schools that I knew of at that time, which was FDII and SRFDI, the two preeminent film schools in this country. Nobody was teaching producing. Apparently, it wasn't important to have a producer. It also kind of made sense to me why a lot of our films for so long looked so bad. Their production values were pretty shabby. And that's not an accusation. It's just the way the system worked. And so mostly I was driven by very selfish desires to have people who knew what they were doing around me so that I could also work in the industry and have a good professional life. And so that's why I found a sympathetic ear at SRFDI. Nobody at FDII was remotely interested. They were very happy with the status quo. But I think the people at SRFDI were just a lot more forward-looking. They understood that there was a certain weakness that needed to be addressed and something that needed to be done about it. And so, that's great. That course is now 11 years old, almost 12 years old. So a decade of putting people out. And I'm very proud to see many of our alumni out there kind of doing great work. I think also that in the last 15 to 20 years, the idea of what a professional producer is has now taken root in India. When people talk about a producer in 2024, they don't mean the money guy. They don't mean the diamond businessman. They don't mean any of those people. They actually mean either the company that's producing or the people who are actually executing the production for the company. And I think that change has 2 or 3 reasons. One, I think, is people like me and others who had gone abroad, worked abroad, studied abroad, and came back home with an idea of who a professional producer is and tried to implement that here. Secondly, the arrival of the studios, of the foreign studios, who, when they came with their large pots of money, were also expecting an equal amount of responsibility, accountability, transparency, and organization. So, like I said before, people, when I asked to see a budget, nobody could ever actually give me a feature film budget in the first 3 years that I was here. When I asked to see a schedule, nobody could give me a schedule. But scheduling had been taught at these film schools. Everybody had been taught how to make a strip board, but they'd leave the film school, come to the industry, and then forget everything they'd been taught. So this idea of having an organized production is why we set up the course. But I think that while building the course and allowing the course to grow, sort of simultaneously, things have come into the industry that have sort of made the ecosystem change and want a more sort of organized and streamlined way and a more accountable way of making films and being accountable for the amount of money that we spend. So, yeah.
Jamshed, building on the question of, having a producing course at SRFTI, from a legal perspective, what key aspects of IPR education do you believe are essential?
I'm a product of that time where we had to, do everything on our own, go to the US library. You were fortunate if you had entry into a place like that, looked for, LexisNexis and other such, details and see how contracts were made abroad. And there was absolutely nobody who sort of, taught us anything. So, we learned all this on our own. And I think it's just like that. And Now, as far as a filmmaker is concerned, he too is, and I'm so glad because I keep using that example of the Jimmy Jib, and I'm glad you mentioned it as well. I think it's both ways. I think first and foremost, you should have somebody who can teach you or talk to you about what the legal system is all about. I think that's very important. In that, whether it's on the civil side, the criminal side, then you have exactly, I mean, because most of, and this is interesting, worldwide, it is based on contractual obligations, most of the dealings. So, contract law would form a very major part of what you should learn. Of course, intellectual property, yes. Uh, if you don't adhere to it, then what are the various, consequences? That's very important because, it's not only, costs and damages, it can lead to, a criminal, breach if you violate somebody's intellectual property. I mean, in the earlier days, they would actually come and, sort of confiscate your negative. Now, of course, that is all digital, so that question doesn't arise. But as sort of time has evolved, all these things have happened. One of the biggest problems today, of course, which I think should definitely be taught, is how to take care in a cyber world. With cybercrime happening. I mean, we've had so many instances of what you've done, and you've handed your sort of Bible over to someone, and before you can say Jack Robinson, it's gone halfway around the world, and somebody else is sort of doing something with it, and you then get a whiff of it on the internet and say, well, this is what I've created. So of course, registration, that is very important. You should register your documents. You should get copyright registration done. Of course, if it's in India, then in India. If it's done in the US, in the US, and also understand that that has worldwide implications, that you get protection now because of conventions, worldwide as well. So you don't need to necessarily, unlike a trademark, which you have to register in different territories, this copyright can be, a single registration across the world. So all these things need to be taught. Of course, you should also, because when the dispute arises, what would you do? You must know the meaning of mediation. What is arbitration? I distinctly remember one very famous actor who called me once from South Africa, and I said, "Where's your contract?" And she sent me in those days a huge fax which had about 3 clauses. And I said, "Where's the arbitration and clause in that?" And she said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, that is the beginning and the end of your contract." So I think it's very important to understand that these terminologies and how it actually functions. I mean, the US, of course, has very well advanced in this. I mean, in India, we're hoping that all this will catch up. You can file for small claims. You should try as far as possible to try and resolve your dispute and ensure it doesn't go to court till the last resort. I think that should always be something that you should keep in mind. And and of course, as I said, things are evolving. So I mean, in certain cases, the unions play a role, associations play a role. But I think overall, the object is to make the film, and creatively, that should be the focus. Legal, of course, very important, but focus on creativity.
As a consulting producer for various production companies, how do you navigate the evolving landscape of digital media, such as content licensing agreements and global distribution rights?
So, the arrival of OTT in India is interesting because most of the people who kind of decided they wanted to get involved in making content for OTT were people who had come from the film world. And OTT is essentially, I mean, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but OTT is essentially television online. And television is as old as the hills. It's not new. Episodic content is not new. It is as old as forever. And I come from a TV world. That's where I started. But then there are creators, filmmakers, people who are writers and directors and producers and who want to make their own sort of creative mark in the world. And for them, I think it is more important to understand IP, because that's what defines them as a creator, or that is what will define them as a creator, right? So the difference between somebody like a Gulzar, who for years understood the value of what he was writing and never let anybody have copyright of his lyrics, right? He held on to that because he could. I mean, he I think garnered enough clout by the time these laws came along that he could say that. And if people wanted Gulzar lyrics, they had to go with that plan, right? But for somebody who's new to the game, but who's good, and someone shows interest in your work, you need to decide for yourself whether you want to own your own creativity or whether you're okay selling it and moving on. And sometimes, you can be young and never have done anything, but written something really amazing, and you don't have any clout, and you have no choice but to sell and do the next one. But what I advise is that if you are somebody who wants to have your own identity as a creator or a filmmaker or a writer, is that at some point you need to start negotiating on the basis of your understanding of the value of what you bring. So, once you've written 2 scripts and both scripts have done well, and someone has come to you to commission a third, to me, that's a sign of they want your writing specifically. So you have to understand that what you bring to the table has value. It is not just the people who are paying for the production. And that they want what you write, and that it has value, and that you must negotiate to get that value for yourself, or to make sure that you have ownership or part ownership of the value of what you do going into the future. I don't think creators can afford to be selfish. I mean, what we do is, it is a team thing, isn't it? Everybody has to be involved. And a good writer is only a good writer when somebody reads what they write or somebody sees what they write. You can write forever, and if nobody makes a film, nobody knows you're a good writer. So it's understanding those things, understanding your value, understanding your place in the hierarchy and the team concept of making cinema or OTT. And then also learning not to be afraid. I think a lot of people, when they come up against corporations, are afraid. Oh, it's just me. What do I do? How can I? Well, if you are clear about what you want and you're happy to walk away without signing a deal unless you get what you want, then you're very strong. You're not weak. You're weak only when you don't know what you want. You know what I mean? Your weakness is in the doubt. Your weakness is in the uncertainty. And uncertainty is dispelled by a little bit of study, good legal backup, and a bit of chutzpah. I think creators need that. They need to have a bit of chutzpah, especially if they know that they are good. And a lot of writers and directors are people who understand that they have a talent that not many others do. And they need to be confident in their talent and fight for it. Yeah.
Jamshed, what emerging trends or legal issues have you observed within the Indian film industry concerning copyright, and how do you anticipate these trends shaping in the future?
So I think the first and the most important aspect is, I think, uh, full industry status to the industry. I think that is very important. I mean, look at all the other industries around. They've all been given such a lot of support, government wise. And I think that'll help. That is, and each, the great thing is, since it is a state subject, each state can also do it, and, the union can come in too. The second aspect is taking cue from what Miriam said is, now that you have all the international players, so all the best practices that we have, internationally, I'm always one who says, I mean, you have words like local and things like that. I think take the best that is available in the West, and be a creative enough. I mean, put all that together, get your own methods, especially for dispute resolution. I think that's very, very, very important. I don't think we still have an excellent dispute resolution system, especially for, most of the claims are small and maximum medium size. I mean, the real large ones, fair enough, those can go to court, of course. Copyright issues have to go to either a district court or the high court. So that is the law. But I think, that's again something that you can do. Maybe you can even change the copyright law and have a dispute settled at the registrar stage, where, for example, in trademarks, you can do that. Here, it's not really possible. So I think that's one. The other thing that I, really would like to see is a much greater role of insurance. Insurance is very interesting because, yeah, you can get a collateral with an insurance policy on the basis of the copyright that you own. I mean, there are insurance policies that are available now in the market. I mean, there are large reassurance broking companies which are now in India, who've done, fantastic work, and your entire project can be insured start to finish. So I think that will also give you peace of mind, and these are the sort of some of the interesting issues. So and I think, as far as copyright and other things are concerned, uh, as you go along, and I'm not saying that the industry is not mature, but legally mature, once that happens, you will see a very, very different kind uh, you know, uh, of legal issues that will happen. And only those which really need to go to court should go to court. I mean, I'm saying that despite being a lawyer, but I genuinely think that, that is the way forward as far as India is concerned.
Miriam, your experience spans not only production but also consultancy roles and involvement in festivals. From this vantage point, what growing trends have you observed in the Indian film industry?
Well, I think that in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, India has grown a really healthy independent film sector. It's always had a very healthy commercial film sector up and down the country, regional and Bollywood, Hindi cinema. And what used to be called alternative or art house was small and for the most part bound within India. I think what we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is that independent filmmakers have found the mechanisms to get into co-productions, what Jamshed was talking about earlier. In the last 10 to 15 years, India as a nation has signed, I think we have about 15, international co-production treaties with different countries, which makes the process slightly, well, I won't say easier. It's probably a lot better for lawyers because lawyers make a lot of money on international co-productions. There's a lot of legal paperwork. But what it has done is it has allowed a very, very healthy independent film sector to grow and for Indian stories and cinema to travel around the world. which means that, a lot of those films are films that are funded by what we, colloquially call soft funds, funds that don't need to be returned, or funds that don't have a cast iron ROI attached to them, right? So whether it's grants, whether it's film funds, finishing funds, pre-production funds, there are, thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of funds that you can apply for. And Indians have kind of got that and gotten into it. And they've also understood that thing, which is, when you want to tell your own story and you don't want it nipped or tucked by various concerns, whether they're commercial or political or social or cultural or religious, many, many things can censor a storyteller. And being an independent filmmaker to a great extent allows you to escape the censors in that sense. And you get to tell your story more or less how you want to tell it. That's very attractive to creators, to filmmakers, to storytellers. And so for me, that's been the greatest thing to watch that grow, to watch people get confident in their storytelling, and then to watch the commercial industry, of which I was a part for a very long time, actually begin to take notice of those independent filmmakers. So, back in the day, it was, art house wale hain, hum to commercial wale hain. Inko paisa nahi banana hai, humko paisa banana hai. Now, the commercial industry is beginning to understand that the audience is as varied as the kinds of filmmakers, and that there is a market and an audience for different kinds of films. I mean, just as an example, Salman Khan, who is pretty much one of our biggest stars in the world, and Tiger, which was one of the big franchises. Tiger 3 came out a few months ago and did very little business, or very little business compared to what the makers thought it would do, right? And I know that post-COVID, a lot of people were saying, theatrical is going to be all about the big spectacle and no one's going to go to the theater for a small film. And then 2 weeks ago, Madgaon Express comes up, which is a tiny little film with no stars in it, nothing in it. And people have been going to the theaters to see it, right? So I think that the growth of the independent sector, that bringing the understanding that the audience is interested in different kinds of films, I think that is beginning to inform in quite a real way the commercial decisions that are now being made, which means that the kinds of filmmakers who are getting opportunities to do things is growing, right? Back in the day, it was these 5 filmmakers, these 8 stars, these 4 music directors, and these 3 writers. This is it. Inke bina, we can't make a hit. That's changed. And I like that. I also like that what OTT has allowed is that free flow of different kinds of cinema. I'm a Malayali, I come from Kerala. I've always watched Malayalam cinema all my life. I like it. But when before OTT, if you try and tell somebody, hey, watch a Malayalam film, there'd be 1, maybe 2 theaters in Bombay where a Malayalam film might release because the diaspora lives there. Today, you don't need that. And today I find, having worked in Hindi cinema and being in touch with Hindi cinema and filmmakers and producers there, I get so many calls about, Acha, do you know who owns the copyright to this film? Do you know who owns the copyright to that film? Do you know a writer from there who can come and write for us? That is, so to me, the digital revolution, whether it's in actual technology or the platforms, all of that, what that's done is democratize creativity and the displaying of a variety of talents. I enjoy, and I'm really happy to see what's happened with that in the last 15 years, because I now have many different kinds of voices telling me stories, and I like that. Yeah.
Miriam, what's your message to, young filmmakers and writers and those aspiring to be a producer in such a competitive world today?
I think it's the same advice I'd have given 30 years ago and the same advice I was given when I was leaving film school, which is know what you're doing, do your homework, do your research, understand what you're getting into. If you're somebody who wants to write for the screen, study screenplay writing. And I don't mean you have to go to college to do that. I'm saying go and do your work, go and understand how screenplay writing works. What is the connection between what you put on the paper and what ends up on the screen? Understand the process of filmmaking. If you want to write for the screen, understand how those words get turned into pictures and sound. So like Jamshed said, he needs to know what a Jimmy Jib is. In the same way, a writer who writes, one line in a screenplay and says, the car blew up. That's one line. It's 1/8 of a page. Now that the car blew up could take 3 days to shoot, depending on how the director visualizes the car blowing up. Is it the car blowing up, flying and landing in the sea? Is it the car just blowing up in a car park? Is it the car blowing up and taking 14 other cars with it? It's understanding that this is a process and that it's not as simple as you just writing and chalo yelo, here's my masterpiece. No. Being a team effort, being a long process, understand that process. You don't have to be an expert at it, but understand it. So whether you're a writer or you're a producer or you're a media and entertainment lawyer, I think the advice remains the same, whether you're a carpenter or a nurse. Know your craft, take the time to understand it, study it, enjoy it. Yeah, I think that's, I can't think of anything better to tell people. But also be ready to work hard. I think that the general idea out there about our industry is that, yes, it's very glamorous and it all just kind of happens. It doesn't happen. It's really hard work. It is physically, mentally, and emotionally draining and challenging work. And then if you add intellectual property and contracts to it, it's extremely confusing work too, so be ready to work hard, be ready to one of my favorite sayings when I teach my producing students is the more sweat in peacetime, the less blood in war. We don't want to get to the war stage. We don't want bloodshed. And so if you're prepared, it's the same thing in pre-production. If you are not prepped, when you get to the set, you will hemorrhage money. You will literally bleed out money if you haven't prepared yourself well. And so, yeah, it's the simplest and oldest advice. Know your craft and be prepared to work hard.
Thank you so much, Miriam and Jamshed. It was a truly inspiring conversation. And thank you so much for being on this platform.